This is the brand new Asus ROG Swift PG34WCDN OLED monitor. It's only being announced today and it will be showcased for the first time this week at CES in Las Vegas. But we've been testing it over the last month to bring you a full day one review of this exciting new screen featuring a brand new 5th Gen QD-OLED panel and a whole host of improvements and advancements to go with it. It's a 34-inch ultrawide monitor which uses a brand new 2026 QD-OLED panel, and although the panel manufacturer Samsung Display don't like to label by generations anymore, we think that we can label this as Gen 5 given all of the updates and improvements that are being offered. The generation naming scheme is our own, but this does seem to make it clearer for the market to understand the changes and the differences. Despite the similar model number, don't be confused with the previous PG34WCDN, which had a WOLED panel and a much steeper curvature. This new N model features a brand new QD-OLED panel and a very different spec and feature set. You may have seen some additional information about the underlying panel in our earlier videos, as this was showcased first of all at Computex last May. You might be aware already of the 360Hz refresh rate that it offers, but that's not the only change. There's loads of new updates that we've not been allowed to talk about before, but we can finally unveil today. If you've already watched our review of MSI's equivalent MPG34WCDN-X36 monitor, published at the same time as this video, you can use the timestamps below to skip past the first section where we talk all about the panel updates and improvements, as we've repeated the same information here as in that review. So if you've heard that already, you can skip to the specific testing for this screen a bit later on. Otherwise, we definitely recommend hearing all about the panel updates and improvements, as there's loads of exciting information to share. This is the third 34-inch ultrawide QD-OLED monitor panel that Samsung Display have produced to date, following on from their Gen 1 panel in 2022 and Gen 2 panel in 2024, with the same subtle 1800R curvature and a 3440 by 1440 resolution, same as before. But this new panel that we're referring to as Gen 5 brings a load of improvements and updates that are really exciting and help make this an amazing new ultrawide OLED monitor. Most interesting of all is that this panel offers for the first time a true RGB-stripe subpixel layout. This is the first modern OLED monitor panel from either Samsung Display or LG Display to offer this layout, shifting, in the case of QD-OLED technology, from the previous triangular layout to a standard RGB stripe. With Windows designed to work with that standard layout, that means finally we get perfect text rendering with none of the fringing or artifacts that have been visible on earlier QD-OLED panels. Samsung Display have made some improvements to the subpixel shape over the years, which helped a little bit by shifting from a diamond shape to a square shape, for instance. Both of the previous 34-inch panels had the older diamond shaped subpixel, but other panels like the 27-inch and 49-inch options had a squarer shape. Then the introduction of higher pixel densities on their 32-inch 4K and especially on their 27-inch 4K panels helped a lot too. But this shift to a normal subpixel arrangement helps ensure sharp, clear, artifact-free text on this new panel. This 34-inch ultrawide panel has a 3440 by 1440 resolution still, so the same 110 ppi pixel density as previous generations of this size, but the pixel layout does a great job of improving text and overall image clarity, and it looks the same now as on an equivalent pixel density LCD panel. The second big change of note is an improvement to the panel coating and the finish on this new Gen 5 panel. This is designed to help address two areas that have been problematic on QD-OLED panels before. Firstly, it now offers increased panel hardness, which increases it from a rating of 2H to 3H, and now offers 2.5 times better scratch resistance apparently. We've never had issues ourselves with scratches on any of our OLED panels that we've tested over the years, but some people have reported problems, and so this will be a welcome change to the coating hardness for anyone who's concerned about it. The second benefit of the new coating is that it is designed to help improve perceived black depth in well-lit rooms and in the presence of ambient lighting, which is achieved through a combination of the coating update and an adjustment to the colour layers and light absorption of the panel. In the presence of ambient or direct lighting, blacks typically turn grey or purple even on QD-OLED panels, and that's been a long-standing challenge for this technology and one of the main drawbacks compared with competing WOLED panels. It's caused by the lack of a polarizer and the inadvertent activation of the quantum dot layer on the QD-OLED panel. And if you're using the monitor in a bright room or with light sources that face the screen, it can sometimes spoil your image and the otherwise amazing contrast that you'd expect from an OLED panel. The new coating can't solve this fully, but it does a pretty decent job of improving the perceived black depth in practice, even in brighter room conditions or direct lighting. We measured up to an 11% improvement in black depth using our previous measurement approach, and an additional key advantage seems to be that the pinkish purple tint is now eliminated and you get a darker grey instead of a purplish colour to the image, which in turn helps with the perceived contrast ratio. It's a good improvement, but QD-OLED panels still remain a step behind the best WOLED panels, such as the glossy 4th gen WOLED panel used here on the Asus ROG Strix XG27AQWMG in this comparison. Note that the coating doesn't change the visual appearance of the panel, which remains semi-glossy with no grain, a glossy appearance, but with some moderate anti-reflective capabilities, which is particularly useful on a curved screen like this where reflections can otherwise look distorted. It looks the same as the previous QD-OLED coating in these areas in side-by-side testing. The third big change with this new 34-inch panel is an increase to the refresh rate, now offering 360Hz and a significant step up from the previous 240Hz offered from their Gen 2 panel from 2024 and the 175Hz Gen 1 panel from 2022. That improves motion clarity as you track moving objects across the screen by a reasonable amount for gamers who can power frame rates up to 360Hz sufficiently, along with other gaming benefits like reduced stroboscopic artifacts as content moves past a fixed area of focus on the screen, increased frame rate support for competitive gamers, and reduced overall system latency. It also includes support for faster BFI modes in theory where they're available from the monitor. Not everyone is going to need the additional refresh rate room or be able to power it, but it's a welcome change for faster paced gaming and competitive situations. It's nice to see a bump in refresh rate for the ultrawide gamers out there, with all of the previous ultrawide panels across all sizes and panel technologies, whether that's WOLED or QD-OLED, being limited to a maximum of 240Hz until now. We'll talk more about the gaming performance and measurements for this particular screen a bit later on. The fourth big change with this new Gen 5 ultrawide panel is the shift to Samsung Display's latest EL 3.0 OLED material, which helps improve both panel brightness and lifespan. Samsung Display have been updating their electroluminescence layer, their EL layer, every 2 years or so, and it's considered one of the significant and fundamental changes between different generations. This EL Gen 3.0 was first featured on their 27-inch 4K resolution panel from 2025, and that's the only panel produced so far which uses it, and so this new 34-inch panel is only the second that they produced based on this new OLED material. EL 3.0 helps improve efficiency by more than 30%, resulting in no increase to power consumption over previous panels and no additional heat generation. That in turn allows them to push peak brightness without any additional risk of burn-in or image retention. That means that this new monitor is certified to the VESA Display HDR 500 True Black tier, a step up in requirements from the True Black 400 tier that all previous QD-OLED panels have reached in this size. In fact, this is only the second QD-OLED monitor panel to reach this higher brightness tier, the other one being their 27-inch 1440p 500Hz panel from 2025, which didn't actually use their EL 3.0 material, but had an optimized panel structure that allowed some improvements to brightness. Taking things a step further though with this EL 3.0 base panel, this is the first QD-OLED panel to offer an increased peak brightness spec of 1300 nits, a 30% improvement in fact over all previous QD-OLED monitor panels which have been stuck at 1000 nits for several years now. We'll measure HDR performance in more detail in a moment. For SDR, there's also an improvement in the maximum luminance spec from 250 nits to 300 nits with this new panel. Keep in mind that as per our studies and detailed article on the topic, an OLED panel that reaches 300 nits luminance would be perceptually equivalent to an LCD panel that reaches around 510 nits. That's due to the improved contrast of the OLED panel and the panel itself can be certified therefore under Samsung Display's True Bright 500 tier as a result. If you want to know loads more about the theory, measurements and certification behind this, then check out our detailed article linked below, as this can be useful when you're trying to compare OLED brightness against traditional LCD screens that you might be considering upgrading from. Samsung Display have also told us that this new EL 3.0 panel structure has also significantly improved durability, with around 2 times the durability from older generations expected, which is great news for those concerned about panel lifespan. This is also supported by a new T-Con or timing control board, which uses an advanced compensation algorithm that can precisely analyze and control the panel on a per pixel basis. So this new 2026 panel offers a true RGB-stripe subpixel layout, improved coating hardness, improved black depth and ambient light handling, an increased refresh rate, improved brightness and improved longevity too. That's a massive set of improvements and certainly worthy, we think, of being labelled as a Gen 5 panel. A step change from their 27-inch Gen 4 panel that was launched last year, and a major evolution of their 34-inch panels that have come before it. We're pending further information about Samsung Display's other 2026 QD-OLED technologies and panels, and we'll be hopefully getting a load more information at CES in the coming days. So we'll provide information on other sizes and updates in a follow-up video in the near future. Do make sure you hit subscribe to stay right up to date on that. Let's have a look at some of the other performance and features of this Asus screen specifically. As part of Asus's ROG Swift lineup, it comes in a familiar design aesthetic and includes modern connectivity options like full-speed DP 2.1 with UHBR20 speeds, USB Type-C with 90 watts power delivery, and 2 HDMI 2.1 inputs as well. There's a KVM switch function, as well as support for picture-in-picture and picture-by-picture for handling multiple video inputs. There's 3 USB-A data ports and a headphone connection as well, but there's no speakers on this screen. The stand offers tilt, height and swivel adjustments, which are all smooth and easy to use, with the stand providing a very sturdy base for the large screen with very little wobble at all. If you've got a DP 2.1 graphics card with UHBR20 support, then you can run the full spec without DSC being needed at all, and that can be disabled from the on-screen menu. For older DP 1.4 graphics cards, the full spec can be supported using DSC too. All of Asus's OLED Care Pro features are featured here as well, including their Neo Proximity motion sensor, which can be customized to your viewing position and can turn the screen off when you leave and back on when you return. Their Display Widget Center software, which we looked at recently, is surprisingly useful for configuring and controlling the screen, and includes support for auto firmware updates and application-linked preset switching as well, which can be really useful, we think, and definitely worth checking out if you own any of the Asus monitors. For office and general usage, the true RGB-stripe subpixel layout provides clean and sharp text, and the resolution offers a nice desktop area for multitasking and split-screen work. There are some low blue light modes available, although only if you disable their uniform brightness mode, with each getting progressively warmer. Levels 1, 2 and 3 still allow access to the brightness control, but level 4 also has a lock brightness at around 120 nits, so it's a little bit more restrictive. Let's talk about gaming capabilities. We measured the usual near instant response times from the OLED panel, which can easily keep up with the frame rate, and there is no visible overshoot either, including in VRR situations. With a 360Hz refresh rate, you get excellent motion clarity and smooth motion, which offers some small improvements over previous 240Hz panels of this size. That'll be a welcome change for competitive gamers. This is probably most apparent when you're tracking smaller details, like in this example, which includes moving text on the image, and you can also get benefits in terms of frame rate support and overall end-to-end system latency thanks to the higher refresh rate. Although you'll need to consider, of course, whether you can power those kind of frame rates. There's a super low input lag as well, which was great news, and it makes it well suited to even fast-paced competitive games. Familiar Asus gaming extras are also included here, including their wide range of game visual preset modes, Game Plus settings like crosshairs and FPS counters, and their shadow boost control for tweaking darker games. Shadow Boost is available to use in SDR and can tweak the details in darker games reasonably well, although it mostly adjusts the middle grey shades, only really improving the near black detail when you use the dynamic Shadow Boost mode, which changes lighter grade shades quite significantly. One to experiment with in darker scenes if you want to. The setting is not available in HDR mode, but that offers very good shadow detail in HDR content anyway. There's also various aspect ratio modes available, including emulation modes for 24.5 inch and 27 inch size screens, which offer custom resolutions to ensure 1:1 pixel mapping and accurate and sharp images. They could be useful if you want to simulate a smaller screen size for certain gaming situations. Other options are available to handle squarer aspect ratios and ultra-wide resolutions too. The 27-inch mode didn't look as sharp as it should do, which we fed back to Asus, and they've confirmed that this will be fixed in their next firmware update, which will be used in the mass production units anyway. The screen supports adaptive sync for variable refresh rates from compatible systems and includes a setting in the menu for OLED VRR anti-flicker as well. We tested the screen in normal mode and found that there was high levels of noticeable flicker in situations where the frame rate varies a lot. Unlike WOLED panels, the gamma is not directly tied to the frame rate, and so the flickering behaviour is a bit different here. You get consistent spikes of flicker in terms of their amplitude, but the frequency of those spikes increases as your frame rate lowers. So the trick with QD-OLED panels is to try and keep not only your frame rate consistent, but also as high as possible to reduce the frequency of any spikes. Situations where you cross the LFC boundary also cause noticeable flicker at the lower end of the VRR range. The OLED anti-flicker mode, which has a simple on-off setting here, seems to do a really good job of suppressing the flicker though. It alters the active VRR range as shown, including turning it off altogether for a portion of the range in the middle, but overall this reduces visible flicker significantly. It seems to work really well. Asus have also included their ELMB, their extreme low motion blur setting, which operates a black frame insertion or BFI mode, which will improve the perceived motion clarity when gaming at lower refresh rates. It works up to 180Hz on the screen, and it's a good way to shortcut your way to 360Hz like motion clarity, even if you can only power games at lower frame rates. That's higher actually than would be possible on any previous Gen 34-inch QD-OLED panel, as BFI modes are restricted to half the native refresh rate of the panel at the moment, and so having a higher native refresh rate gives you more room to use BFI at lower refresh rates here. Asus haven't actually offered BFI on their previous 34-inch ultra-wide OLED monitors at all, so it's a new feature offered here on this PG34WCDN model, and could be a differentiator over older 34-inch OLED monitors. It's available at fixed refresh rates of 120Hz and 180Hz, and motion clarity when using BFI at 180Hz is the same as native 360Hz mode, so you can benefit from that motion clarity even if you can only power lower frame rates. The mode is a bit clunky to use, as you first have to disable VRR and also uniform brightness mode at the moment, and then manually change your refresh rate to the lower level before ELMB can then be enabled. We fed this back to Asus for future consideration, as it does make it a little bit annoying when you want to turn it on or when you want to turn it back off and then revert to VRR and your higher refresh rate. But we're told that the interdependencies between VRR, ELMB and timing selection make it very complex to change this behavior at the moment. One other annoyance at the time of testing is that you can't use ELMB at the same time as using any of the non-native aspect ratio mode options. So most notably, it couldn't be used when connected to a games console, as you have to use the 16:9 aspect ratio mode to avoid the image being stretched for a console, and that in turn stops ELMB from being available. We've also fed that back to Asus, and they've confirmed that thankfully they're going to add support for ELMB in normal 16:9 mode in the next firmware update. That will bring support then for 120Hz console gaming, which is great news. Note that the simulation modes for 24.5 inch and 27 inch screen sizes won't be able to support it though. On the subject of aspect ratio modes, at the time of testing, these are not remembered independently between different video inputs, and so you do have to manually switch between the 21:9 mode for PC and then the 16:9 mode for a console. We fed this back to Asus as well in case some kind of auto mode or something could be added to detect the source input aspect ratio and put black borders down the side if needed, without you needing to then manually change the setting each time for different inputs. There was independent brightness control between the on and the off modes, and the screen reaches a modest 152 nits maximum luminance when using ELMB, which is likely okay for most people and is fairly typical for an OLED monitor BFI mode. Although we have seen some modern WOLED monitors reach much higher brightness in their BFI modes, leaving QD-OLED panels lagging behind a bit at the moment. Console support was also strong, with virtual 4K inputs accepted at 120Hz, although keep in mind you'll need to use the screen's scaling and aspect ratio controls to put black borders down the side and show the content correctly in a 16:9 aspect ratio. If you're looking to buy a new monitor for console gaming, do check out our other recent video guide on the topic, which is linked below. In terms of SDR performance, we measured up to 310 nits using Asus's uniform brightness mode. This pretty much avoids any dimming or fluctuations in brightness during desktop applications, and it's likely to be the preferred option for most people. We've seen the recent 4th Gen OLED panels reach even higher luminance in SDR, but there's still a decent step up here for QD-OLED panels in SDR brightness, which usually reach around 260 nits max, and so you have a decent increase here to 310 nits. You do have the option as well to disable the uniform brightness mode if you prefer, which can give you a boost in brightness for SDR gaming and multimedia if you want. That reaches up to 510 nits now, which is impressive, although you do get ABL dimming depending on your scene, so you might experience fluctuations in brightness as your content changes. The default racing mode operates with the full native color space of the panel and has a nice accurate setup in terms of gamma, color temp and grayscale, which was very good, and it offered a strong factory calibration. With the wide color space active, the accuracy of sRGB colors was poor as normal for any wide gamut screen, but the accuracy of DCI-P3 colors is good as it's a closer match to the native gamut of the panel. This mode provides a vivid and more saturated image, which some people will like for gaming and general usage, but if you're looking to work more accurately with specific color spaces, there's also a couple of emulation modes available too. There are 2 modes that you can use for sRGB emulation. The first is just to switch the color space setting from wide gamut to sRGB in whatever preset mode you're using, such as the default racing mode. This leaves you with full access to adjust other settings that you might want to change, giving great flexibility in this mode. There's no change to the gamma, grayscale or color temp, which remain very good, but the color space is now clamped back to sRGB, making it far more suitable for working accurately with sRGB and SDR content, and reducing the oversaturation of the native mode. Color accuracy for sRGB colors was now excellent. There's also a dedicated sRGB Cal preset mode available, which performs slightly differently. This mode has lockdown settings apart from the brightness control, but is configured to the slightly different sRGB gamma curve, which actually helps improve the near black shadow detail very nicely. In all of the other modes, it's rated as moderate, with the first visible grayscale shade being RGB5, but in this sRGB Cal mode, it's excellent, and the first visible RGB shade is now visible. That's potentially one very good reason to use this sRGB Cal mode instead of the other approach. The color space clamping and color accuracy were excellent again in this mode, so it's probably a better mode to use as long as you don't need access to make further adjustments beyond the brightness control. There's also a DCI-P3 color space setting available, which remains nice and accurate again for gamma and grayscale, and provides a nice clamping to the DCI-P3 color space commonly used for HDR content. This also leads to very good accuracy for DCI-P3 colors. The screen provides good coverage of the Adobe RGB color space, but there's no specific preset mode to clamp to that target space on this screen, something that we'd like to see Asus add in the future as it's offered on some competing models. Calibration can produce some excellent results as well and allows you to operate with the native color space, but then clamp back to a target color space such as sRGB for color aware applications. You can find our best settings guide and a link to our calibrated ICC profile in the description below if you want to try those out. When it comes to HDR performance, the QD-OLED panel offers the usual hardware level capabilities such as per pixel level dimming, which avoids halos and blooming, and a potentially infinite contrast ratio with the ability to turn off individual pixels. As we talked about earlier, the new coating helps with perceived black depth in brighter rooms, which is a welcome improvement to this new Gen 5 panel, although optimal performance for HDR is in a darker room. There's 4 HDR modes available to choose, as well as the ability to customize each mode when using the adjustable HDR setting, which gives you access to tweak the brightness and colors if you want to. Each mode behaves slightly differently though, so we'll go through that in a bit more detail. Peak white luminance reached up to the advertised 1300 nits when using the console, gaming and cinema HDR modes, but it's capped to around 522 nits when using the True Black 500 mode, a mode that's designed for accuracy and to pass VESA's certification process. That mode also exhibits less overall dimming due to the more consistent but lower brightness. While it has accurate EOTF performance, which ensures detail is retained, it's limited in its peak brightness capabilities, and so most people will probably want to use one of the other 3 modes, we think. Thanks to the new 5th Gen panel and EL 3.0 material, the peak white luminance is around 11% higher than the 2nd Gen 240Hz panel of this size, even more so for the darkest scene highlights where it can reach up to 30% higher. The EOTF tracking also needs to be considered here though as well, as this impacts accuracy and image detail in HDR content. The True Black 500 mode shows the most accurate performance with only minor roll-off as the APL increases and scenes get brighter. That's actually useful for helping to preserve lighter shade detail in those brighter scenes. The gaming and cinema modes behave very similarly to one another, showing some fairly significant over-brightening in darker, low APL scenes, which causes some loss of detail in mid to light shades. This is done though as it helps to negate some of the significant panel dimming that you get on QD-OLED panels in the brighter scenes in these modes. And this in turn helps to ensure that in those brighter, higher APL scenes, they don't end up looking a lot darker than they should. On QD-OLED panels, you generally have to sacrifice in one way or another, and over-brightening in darker scenes is the trade-off for retaining overall HDR scene brightness. You can see the impact of the panel dimming actually in full effect if you use the console HDR mode. From the EOTF tracking measurements, you can see that it's more accurate at 10% APL, avoiding the over-brightening in the gaming and cinema modes. That means that you can make out more detail in some scenes as a result. However, as the APL increases and the scenes get overall brighter, the panel dimming causes a significant darkening of the image, and this mode ends up looking noticeably darker than even the True Black 500 mode in real content. We've seen this on other Asus QD-OLED screens in the past, where some modes include a compensation to try and negate that panel dimming and the darker performance, but one mode remains if you really wanted to use the darker setup for whatever reason. That's what the console mode offers here. Asus do actually offer a setting that makes the console HDR mode behave basically the same as the gaming and cinema modes, boosting the brightness at the cost of some over-brightening in some situations. It's available via the dynamic brightness boost setting, which is only accessible when using the console mode, and you can see that it ends up basically very similar to the other two modes as a result. If you've enabled dynamic brightness boost in console mode, in practice it looks very similar to the gaming and cinema modes, and they all look very similar to one another in real content, and look just as bright as the True Black 500 mode in brighter scenes, with more impressive, brighter highlights in darker scenes, just at the cost of some accuracy and detail because of that over-brightening of the EOTF. We can also evaluate the colour brightness of the panel in HDR using the XCR method, which is great for directly comparing the perceived brightness differences between different panels. The PG34WCDN is around 5 to 6% brighter perceptually in colours than earlier 34-inch QD-OLED models. We can also compare the HDR colour brightness against a 4th Gen WOLED panel, which highlights one remaining difference between the competing OLED technologies. The advancements in panel brightness and colour space on the 4th Gen WOLED panels are good, but for the lowest APL scenes, it still lacks the necessary colour volume to compete with QD-OLED. You get brighter, more saturated colours for bright highlights in dark scenes on a QD-OLED panel thanks to its true RGB additive approach to luminance, as opposed to the WOLED panel, which starts to rely more on the white subpixel boost in those situations, helping overall brightness but causing some mild washout of colours. In practice, colours remain more vivid and saturated in darker scenes on QD-OLED panels than on WOLED. For more information about XCR, how it's calculated, what it represents, see our detailed article linked below for loads more information. All the HDR modes offer excellent colour temp and grayscale accuracy, which is great news, and there's flexibility to make adjustments to things like the colour temperature if you want a warmer or a cooler temp for whatever reason. There's also very good colour accuracy for HDR content, which is great news. The PG34WCDN is an excellent new ultra-wide OLED monitor, and it offers some very good new panel updates and improvements that set it apart from all of the previous QD-OLED ultra-wide monitors that have been released in the last few years. The true RGB-stripe subpixel layout is likely to be the headline change that attracts a lot of people who've maybe been concerned about text clarity or fringing on previous generations. It's great to see that finally offered, and we do hope to see it incorporated on other future QD-OLED panels in other sizes in the future. We're waiting on more information from Samsung Display at CES this week, so we'll provide a further update on their latest 2026 technologies, updates and panels in the near future. It's also great to see Samsung Display take steps to address some user concerns around coating hardness, as well as trying to improve the black depth and ambient light handling in brighter room conditions. It's certainly nowhere near fully resolved, but it's better than previous QD-OLED panels, which is a positive change. Obviously, the increased refresh rate and gaming capabilities are always welcome, and it's a decent step up from earlier ultra-wide OLED panels in that area. It's also good to see improvements in SDR and HDR brightness thanks to the new EL 3.0 material and Gen 5 panel. The Asus PG34WCDN will be on show at CES for the first time later this week, but hopefully you found this day one full review useful and interesting. Pricing and availability information is still being finalised. So far we've been told that it's expected to launch in Q1 2026, but we'll provide updates on our website when we have any more information to share. We've also just finished reviewing another new Asus screen that will be on show at CES, a 32-inch QD-OLED display, which is a version 3 model of their super popular PG34WCDN with loads of new features and updates. You can find a link to that below as it's available in written format on our website now. You might also want to check out our full review of MSI's equivalent 34-inch ultra-wide QD-OLED monitor that was also announced today and published at the same time. That's linked in the description below as well. We'll be bringing you all of the best news from Asus and other monitor manufacturers from CES soon, so make sure you hit subscribe to stay up to date on all of that exciting news. Thank you for watching, we'll catch you next time.